I'm Vicki Berenson. I've been working with the Safe Skies Clean Water Wisconsin for over a year. It just blends, right? Maybe it's 2 years. A lot of people thought that with the Air Force decision last March that this was all over and we were getting the F-35 jets, but there have been a lot of really interesting developments lately. And we haven't given up. We've been we've engaged an attorney to file lawsuits, and we're working on other legal action as well. So, with the latest new developments, with the Department of Defense reevaluating the F-35 program, the FAA reexamining its noise standards, and the actions in the House to seriously reduce the defense budget, it looks like there's some good possibilities that we still may be able to prevent the F-35s from coming here. So what I'd like to do is introduce Kathleen Henry. And Kathleen, you can say who you are and then talk about what you want to say.
Sure, thank you, Vicki. I'm Kathleen Henry. I'm an attorney at Dairyland Public Interest Law in Madison, Wisconsin. Today, we filed suit in the District Court for the District of Columbia over the environmental impact statement issued by the Air Force that would allow the F-35s to come to Madison. We are arguing the Air Force violated the National Environmental Policy Act when it prepared the environmental impact statement. In 2016, the Air Force announced it was considering 5 locations in 5 states for the installation of the F-35s: Madison, Boise, Idaho, Jacksonville, Florida, Mount Clemens, Michigan, and Montgomery, Alabama. Then 1 year later, in 2017, the Air Force announced Madison and Montgomery would get the F-35s. The Air Force did not release a draft environmental impact statement until 2 years later in 2019, 2 years after announcing its decision. In selecting Madison, the Air Force selected the location with the largest number of low-income and minority populations living by the F-35s of all 5 locations. 2 locations, Idaho and Florida, would have no low-income and minority populations living near the bases. Michigan would have had no significant impacts to low-income and minority populations. But the 2 sites selected, Madison and Alabama, both will have in the Air Force's own quote, significant disproportionate impacts to low-income and minority populations, as well as children, end quote. This is not acceptable. We are arguing the Air Force did not adequately consider the impacts on low-income and minority populations who live by Truax and will suffer the most from these planes. And we're asking the court to require the Air Force to prepare an adequate environmental impact statement. Thank you. Wait, you're muted. You're muted, Vicki.
Thank you, Kathleen. So let's hear now from Steve Klafka.
Yeah, good morning. I'm Steve Klafka. I'm an environmental engineer with Safe Skies, and I worked with Kathleen on filing our complaint. Back in August of 2019, the draft EIS was released, and the Air Force received over 6,000 comments on all 5 sites. It's interesting that nearly 90% or 5,700 of those comments were submitted on Truax Field. So it's definitely a controversial project. Over 60 community organizations submitted comments and questions and showed their opposition to the proposed jets. These included the Madison Common Council, the school board, and Safe Skies. And besides ignoring the conclusions of its own EIS when selecting Truax Field, the Air Force ignored most public concerns and questions raised during the public comment period. In fact, the final EIS looks pretty much the same as the draft EIS. In our complaint to the U.S. District Court of District of Columbia, one of the largest shortcomings we found in the final EIS was the noise analysis. The noise analysis use the 65 decibel DNL standard for airports, and this fails to accurately estimate the current and future impacts of noise from F-16 and F-35 fighter jet training. The standard is over 50 years old and is based solely on public annoyance, so it doesn't account for physical, mental, social, and educational impacts caused by fighter jet noise. It's a coincidence that the FAA is currently reviewing its 65 decibel standard and has already found that it should be much lower. Even using the outdated 65 decibel standard, the EIS concluded that nearly 3,000 people would be living in areas considered incompatible with residential use. The noise analysis only used the 65 decibel standard, which is a daily average noise level. It doesn't account for the short-term peak noise exposure, the loudest noise levels that Madison residents actually hear as jets fly over our neighborhoods. The noise analysis stopped at the location of the predicted 65 decibel noise level. It was as if there was a magical line where noise impacts stopped to occur. And so, catch up where I am. And last fall, Safe Skies conducted a fighter jet noise survey, and it shows that many residents on the north side and east sides of Madison find the impacts of fighter jet noise extend far beyond the 65 decibel line. Over 60,000 people live within 3 miles of Truax Field, but most of them were not included in the EIS noise analysis. And besides noise, Safe Skies complaint also identified other EIS faults, including failing to consider the impacts of PFAS contamination on already polluted drinking water, groundwater, surface water, then fish in Starkweather Creek and the Yaharcha lakes. Failure to consider environmental justice, failure to evaluate air quality impacts rather than simply reporting the estimated emissions. Failure to consider alternatives to selecting Truax Field, like a site with which is the site with the greatest environmental impacts, such as a different location, or the option of finding a new mission for the 115th Fighter Wing. The EIS failed to address climate change and the unique flooding conditions around our chain of lakes. It failed to provide adequate notice and public participation, especially for the low income and families of color that live adjacent to Truax Field. And lastly, it failed to determine the impacts on wildlife in Cherokee Marsh adjacent to Truax Field. By filing our complaint, Safe Skies hopes to have the Air Force fix these problems with their EIS, and then recognize that Truax Field is the worst location for the proposed fighter jets. Vicki?
Thank you, Steve. So now we're going to hear from Yogesh Chawla, who's a county supervisor.
Yeah, thanks, Vicki, and thanks everyone for attending and talking about this important issue. My name is Yogesh Chawla. I'm the Dane County Board Supervisor in District 6, which is the near east side of Madison. And I want to really focus on the PFAS and the forever chemicals that have been found at the base and that are hazardous in parts in such low quantities as parts per trillion. This means that an eyedropper full of these chemicals could pollute an entire lake. They can pollute an entire source of drinking water for a community. And we know that there's many of these chemicals right there on the base. We have reintroduced a resolution in the county board opposing the F-35s. And this resolution is not only ceremonial, but it contains a new clause in it where we want to disallow the demolition, construction, and expansion projects at the air base until such a time as a complete site investigation, cleanup feasibility study, and remediation plans have been developed. Those plans not only have to be developed, we want them funded and we want them begun. We know these PFAS chemicals are not disappearing. We know that they're in an urban community where they can infect our drinking water, and they've already done that. We know that these chemicals have had disproportionate impacts on low-income and BIPOC communities. And we know that we have a renewed commitment to equity to really correct the wrongs of the past. So if we want to be true to our words, we have to put our words into action. The specific way to put our words into action is to disallow any construction, demolition, or expansion projects at the airbase until all PFAS remediation has been done. And this should be fully funded, and that work needs to begin. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Yogesh. All right, now let's hear from Brian Benford, candidate for Madison Alder.
Thank you so much, Vicki, and thanks for everybody that's here today. And really thank you to Safe Skies Clean Water, especially the legal team that's taking this action. My name is Brian Benford, and I'm the Alder-elect for District 6 for the city of Madison. For the last 30 years, I've worked on the front lines serving Madison's most marginalized and vulnerable communities. I've worked as a family advocate, as an activist, as an educator. I'm a former alderperson for District 12 for the city of Madison, and I'm the past president of the city of Madison's Equal Opportunities Commission. I don't need to tell anyone on this call or anyone that can hear this that within Dane County, within Madison, we suffer tragically insidious racial disparities within education, within criminal justice, and now within environmental injustice brought on by the potential to bring these insidious weapons of mass destruction, F-35s, to Madison. So I wanted to talk about, from my heart, the environmental injustices. And once again, with the disparities that we face as a community, this is a further assault to all of the work on equity and social justice that we all talk about and that we hope for. So I want to take something from the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law Environmental Law Clinic, who put out a letter just recently, and on behalf of the Safe Skies Clean Water of Wisconsin legal team. So I just wanted to read a little section from this. And as many speakers have talked before me about some of the environmental degradations and social injustices around it, that we have heard that in April of 2020, that the United States Air Force had announced the 115th Fighter Wing at Truax to be one of the units to receive, once again, these horrible, horrendous weapons of mass destruction right here in our backyards. We already know, as it's been stated before, that the surrounding community already suffers excessive noise from the existing F-16 fighter jets that are training. And as has been stated by Steve and others, the contamination of groundwater and surface water due to the release of these horrible, horrible forever chemicals, PFAS, in firefighting foam used by the Air National Guard. In 2020, the Air Force published its final environmental impact statement. And within these documents, we've seen, as has been stated before, that they're extremely flawed, that it makes it clear that those that are most impacted by the proposed fighter jet squadron are the low income and families of color that live adjacent to Truax. So based on the review, the final environmental impact statement that was issued February of 2020 did not adequately evaluate the disproportionate impacts of stationing F-35s on minority, BIPOC communities, low-income communities, and our most precious resource, our children. So I'm deeply, deeply appreciative of all the work that folks are doing to not only protect our water, not only to protect our ground, but more importantly, to show that here in the city of Madison, that we value everybody's right to reach their full potential. So looking out for the environmental injustices around basing the F-35s here gives me hope as a longtime activist fighting on people's behalf. So once again, thank you. And I would know that if there's any questions about the great work of the legal team or what the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law is doing, those questions have come up, and they're looking for community people and collaborations and community-based organizations to sign on. So with that, I'll turn it back to Vicki.
Thanks. Thank you, Brian. So with that, I'm opening up for questions. If anybody has questions, just wave your hand. I can see you, or put up the little hand in the Zoom screen. Did we cover everything pretty well? Brad, you have a question?
So are we keeping in mind the fact that the U.S. military does what it wants to do? I keep seeing in the news about changes in rules and procedures and how the foam is dealt with, and they're going to get rid of and dispose of it. And I feel like none of that can really apply to the military if they don't want it to. So can we keep people kind of up to date on this, not up to date, but aware of the fact that not all these rules are going to apply to the military?
Does someone have an answer to that?
I could say something about.
Steve, you want me to take it?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to do everything we can. You know, we're working on all fronts, and certainly it's different suing the Air Force as opposed to an industry. And you know, lots of things are working for us, since there is a change in heart about defense spending, change in heart about spending so much money on F-35 jets, and that could work in our favor. Also, the change in the administration. The Biden administration has said that environmental justice is a priority for them. So when we file a complaint with EPA over this project, we know it'll get a much better hearing than it would have gotten under the old Trump administration. And so, I guess we recognize there's lots of things that are working against us because we're dealing with the military, but I think the winds have changed a little bit since the last couple of years. So that'll work in our favor.
Thank you, Steve. Brad, you have something else?
I just wish there was some way to put a footnote in every newspaper article that talks about changes to the laws and the rules that this may or may not apply to the U.S. Air Force and the Air National Guard. Thanks.
Thanks, Brad. Tom, you had a question.
I have a question, if I can.
Oh, actually, let's let Chris ask his question, and then Jenny.
Actually, two, but I can split them up. One, I guess, just on a practical point, if you convince the court to require a supplemental EIS or EA, what realistically, how long would that delay another decision by the Air Force? In other words, how long would it take them just to complete a subsequent or supplemental environmental review?
Steve, do you want to answer that, or Kathleen? Who knows the answer to that?
Yeah,
Maybe I'll let Kathleen go first.
Let's let Kathleen answer that one.
right. I don't know how long it would take them to complete a supplemental EIS. Maybe Steve does.
Well, depends. We've got so many faults we found in EIS. It would take a lot of work for them to fix those, and courts move slow. I guess I don't know what our best case is here, that the court says don't do anything further on the project until you fix your EIS, and then as long as it takes them to do that supplement, they can't move forward. If that was the case, I'm sure they'd put their best hands on it, trying to get it done as quickly as possible. Typically EIS is the decision-making tool. It doesn't say yes or no, but the longer we can delay final approval of the EIS, the longer it takes for them to eventually bring the jets here. And maybe during that time, there might be changes in the defense budget or the funding for the jets themselves.
Thanks.
along the same lines, I haven't seen any firm dates on the construction and demo, but I do know that they're moving along with that. Are you considering requesting some sort of stay from either of the courts, either that you filed suits in?
Yeah, that was that's actually next on our to-do list, besides the environmental justice complaint. And we've already interviewed experts, especially related to the PFAS contamination, where we think we'd have the strongest case for arguing that construction should not proceed because it would release more PFAS into the contaminated waters. And so that's definitely something that we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Tom, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I just wanted to, following up a little bit on what Chris had said, I've received a couple of bid requests for signs for the for demolition and new construction at the base, and the bids are due in March 15th with construction to start April 1st. And so I guess what I was wondering and hoping is that this lawsuit that's filed today, does that stop them from going ahead?
Kathleen, that one's for you.
Right. This lawsuit doesn't stop them from going ahead. It's very difficult to get an injunction or lawsuit, the one over the EA or one over the EIS. It's very difficult to get an injunction. So our best bet is to get through the courts as quickly as possible. But we'll have to see what construction they intend to start. Will release PFAS. If they're doing some things above ground that won't release the PFAS, then we wouldn't have a case that their construction is causing the release. So we really have to check on what they're doing.
Rebecca, do you have an answer, or otherwise Jenny had a question?
No, it's not an answer. It's kind of another question related to the last question Chris asked and what Tom just raised. The last time I checked, they had not yet applied for any of the required permits from the DNR for construction, but that was about a little over a month ago. I'm just wondering if any, they can bid whatever they want to, but they can't move forward without the permits from the DNR if they're digging into the soil. So I'm wondering if anyone has any more updated information on that.
I don't have any. I know I saw one of the biggest bids was for rebuilding the hangar for maintenance, where most of the work would be inside and would not disturb the ground. However, I would assume that the contractors that are hired to do the work also be responsible for getting the permits from the DNR, so that maybe they would hire the contractors first and then leave it open. And at that point, when the contractors will go out, take permits from the DNR for the stormwater runoff. And if they generate any contaminated water, they would need a wastewater discharge permit too. But I haven't seen anything related to permits yet.
Thanks. Jenny, you had a question.
So for Kathleen, given that I live in a neighborhood that's severely negatively impacted by the noise pollution from the current F-16s, and my concern as a resident here is that the F-35s, we're told, are going to be much louder, and the F-16 noise is barely tolerable to live with. I've been trying to record decibel levels and take video of the jets to get the noise, just to show people the impact of the noise. Is that anything that would have any value to the suit going forward? And if so, is it something that people who live here should continue to record and get that data for you?
it might have an impact. It would be good to know what the actual levels are. So I could talk to you more outside of this press conference about that. Might be useful to know what they are.
Okay, great. I'd be happy to talk with you more about that.
Yeah, we did discuss the noise survey that we ran this last fall and used that as part of the complaint. That at some later point we could add more to the suit, and so that people do want to do some things for themselves, they can take recordings and post them someplace. Ed Bloom was talking earlier that somebody is going out and setting up noise monitoring stations. So possibly you could talk to Ed and see if the folks that are doing that, if they would be interested in putting a station up in your neighborhood. Ed's much closer to the runways than you are, but it'd be great if they had measurements further away as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, I think we can conclude and just let people know that we're doing everything in our power to right some wrongs and create some justice and prevent excess spending on harmful jets. And thank you especially for the press for coming to this conference and for covering this issue.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us.
And thanks, Chris. Thanks for your reporting.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Vicki. Thank you, Tom. Bradley, you got to go through everybody, but it's very heartening work that you're doing. And I live next to the main approach runway. So if anybody wants to put a noise monitor out by me, give me a call.
I think you should also